Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Aliana Kernodle. Turning down inflationary pressure remains front of mind for voters in Pennsylvania. The two U.S. Senate candidates vying to represent them for the next 6 years both want to fix it, but don't even agree on why it exists. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's Pennsylvania editor, Kristen Smith. Kristen, where does each candidate lay the blame?
So Pennsylvania, in just a couple of weeks, will choose between their incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey Jr. and Dave McCormick, who is challenging him as the Republican candidate. And both of them had made the economy and inflation one of the big centerpieces of their campaigns. But as mentioned in the lead of this story, they have two very different schools of thought on why we have inflation, and therefore they have two very different approaches to what should be done about it. For Casey, the problem is corporate price gouging. And for McCormick, the problem is bad economic policy coming from the Biden administration. Casey's been a senator for he's been through 3 terms in their 6-year term. So he's been in Congress for a while. McCormick says 99% of the time he's voted with his party and his president. 99% of the time, that means he's voted with President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. As listeners know, Kamala Harris is running for president on the Democratic ticket. So McCormick spends a lot of time tying Casey to the economic policies that he says are the reason that we see double-digit price increases in gas and rent and groceries and all of the things that we need to survive day to day. And Casey thinks that this isn't exactly the full story. And in fact, the rate of inflation doesn't match the amount of corporate profits. He says corporate profits are up 75%, which is 5 times the rate of inflation. So there's certainly a disconnect there between the price that consumers are paying versus how much money businesses are taking in, corporations specifically. And he often points to food conglomerates as the main culprits. But he says that this is something that was worsened during the pandemic because corporations took advantage of the supply and demand issues, and they've just never really backed away from that. Everyone's kind of conditioned to believe that this is a new normal. And so those two reasons obviously have very different approaches to how to fix it.
So what are they proposing to fix it?
Casey wants to enact price gouging controls that are in line with Vice President Kamala Harris, who has also proposed similar legislation. I think back in August is when she brought it up. And this would fine companies who are engaged in price fixing. And it would also give the government more authority to cap prices and to control what consumers are paying. This is something that he says would help, obviously, lower costs and keep consumers from having to bite the bullet on quote unquote inflation that may or may not be as bad as corporations want us to think it is. On the other hand, McCormick says that a bill like this, and he is in step with other Republicans here who criticize it, including Donald Trump, who's running at the top of the Republican ticket. He said that this bill is, basically the same as the price controls that we've seen, during the Soviet era in Venezuela. He calls it akin to socialism. And he thinks that it's not going to help prices go down. It's only going to help them go up. He's made the comment that a lot of economic policies Casey supports hinge on the fact that Casey and Democrats believe that the government knows how to spend money better than consumers actually do.
So how do voters feel about these ideas?
Well, thanks to a recent Voters' Voice poll that was in part commissioned by the Center Square, we have a pretty good idea of how they think. And that is that 46% of respondents actually support the idea of preventing price gouging and capping the cost of items. But they're mixed about how that would impact actual prices. I think because there is a history in the world of this sort of idea that it's even happened in America back in the 70s. Former President Nixon tried to do this. And, critics are saying that it did more harm than good. By the same token, corporations aren't suffering. They certainly are making millions and millions of dollars. And there is, of course, always and forever the pressure on middle class families. And many are looking to their lawmakers to fix the problem. It's just a matter of where does that problem originate? Which brings us back to the very beginning of the story is, who do voters think has a better handle on this issue and has a better solution. In Pennsylvania so far, polling averages have showed that voters prefer Casey by several percentage points, as much as 5 points in the last month or so. So his lead, although pretty strong, has narrowed over the last 6 months or so since McCormick became the Republican nominee. We'll see if that polling performance is skewed at all by Democrat advantage or Republican oversampling. We won't know until Election Day, but as far as those pollings indicate, it seems that voters are trusting Casey more still.
Well, Kristen, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.